Hey everybody, my name is Dr. Scott Giacomucci. I'm the director and founder of the Phoenix Center for Experiential Trauma Therapy in Media, Pennsylvania. I'm board certified in clinical social work and psychodrama, and I'm an experiential therapy trainer and educator. I'm really excited that you found this video, and I hope that you find it helpful in your work. This is part of an ongoing video series highlighting my recently published book, Social Work, Sociometry, and Psychodrama, Experiential Approaches for Group Therapists, Community Leaders, and Social Workers. In this video series, we'll be going through the book chapter by chapter to articulate some of the content of the book, to warm you up to the book perhaps, or to help you further understand, process, and digest the content and the processes that are outlined in this book. If you haven't already gotten a copy of the book, you can download it for free online at Springer Nature's website, the publisher, or on Amazon through their ebook platform. If you do find the book helpful, I would be incredibly grateful if you considered leaving an Amazon review, an honest Amazon review about the book, so that we can help reach future audiences. In this video, we'll be focusing on Chapter 5 of the book. Chapter 5 is on sociometry and social work theory. So another aspect of sociometry theory is called the sociogram. And so the sociogram was one of the first sociometry tools that was created. It was first used all the way back in 1915 in Mittendorf refugee camp. It was then used again in the early 1930s in Sing Sing prison in Moreno's research, during which he would go on to coin the term group psychotherapy, 1932. The sociogram, as you can see in the image here, is a depiction of the distribution of choices or connections within a small group, or it could be done in a large group as well. The example that you're looking at is from a sociometric test that I actually conducted in a social work classroom. So in the classroom, as a way to teach about sociograms and sociometric tests, I asked all the students to write on a piece of paper or email me 3 names of peers in the class in order of preference. Who would you like to co-facilitate a group warm-up with in the classroom? And so everybody sent me their responses with their preferences of who they would like to co-facilitate with. And I took all the responses, inputted them into a program which created and generated this sociogram, depicting the distribution of choices and preferences within the classroom. Now, nowadays, there's a half dozen different programs that you can choose from to generate sociograms online. A number of them are free programs. When Moreno created sociograms, of course, none of these programs and technology existed, and they would actually hand draw their sociograms, which can get quite complicated. In the sociogram here, if we look closely and analyze it a bit, we can see that student number 11 is the social star. At least in this criteria, student 11 is the star. They've received by far the most amount of choices from their peers in the class. It looks like 7 people chose student number 11. If we look closely, we can also see that students number 2, 10, and 8 have all received the second highest amount of choices, 4 choices each. If we look a little closer, we can see that student number 6 is the isolate in the classroom when it comes to this criteria, that only one other student chose them for this prompt. So there's other things that we can extract from the sociogram depiction here. There's in sociometry, there's a lot of importance given to reciprocal choices, mutual choices, when two people choose each other for the same prompts. If we look closely, we can see that student 2 and student 8, that all of their choices were reciprocated, reciprocal choices. All of the people, the 3 people they chose to be co-facilitators, they preferred, those same 3 people chose them, in addition to others. So this would be significant sociometrically. There's a couple concepts in sociometry, social phenomenons, that Moreno labeled based on his analysis of dozens and dozens of sociograms and different sociometric tests. One of them is called the sociodynamic effect. So this is a phenomenon that describes the underlying dynamic within all social groups, large and small, which influences the distribution of social wealth and choices and preferences within that group, always resulting in the group having social stars and having social isolates, the unequal distribution of choices of social wealth. This is called the sociodynamic effect. Moreno writes that when he started doing sociometric research, and they compiled all the choices within groups in their sociometric tests, they expected that the choices would result in a normal probability distribution, kind of like a bell curve. But what they found in every sociometric test is that the distribution of choices is always unequally distributed, prior to intervention at least. And this is what they termed the sociodynamic effect. Moreno specifically defines it as a universally present and appearing like a halo effect inherent in every social structure. So the sociodynamic effect is responsible for all inequality in society, responsible for racism, for poverty, for discrimination, for the unequal distribution of resources, of wealth within groups, within society, the unequal distribution of power. So the sociodynamic effect is an important aspect of sociometry in that all group workers, social workers, psychodramatists, and sociometrists, especially leaders, organizational leaders, need to be aware of and attuned to how the sociodynamic effect is negatively impacting their groups and organizations. So part of the role of a sociometrist, group worker, is to identify the sociodynamic effect and to reverse it, to actively intervene in the group dynamics and promote a more equitable group structure and experience. It's important to note, too, that this is just one example of a sociogram based on one criteria, and that in the same group, I could have asked different criteria, different prompts, different questions, which would have resulted in different sociometric structures and sociograms. And so if I asked different questions with different content, rather than who would you like to co-facilitate a warm-up with, we would end up with different sociometric stars and different isolates. If I asked who would you like to co-author a paper with, we would get a different constellation of choices. If I had asked who would you like to go on a trip with, we would get a different constellation of choices. If I asked who would you like to organize a social activist event with, we would get a different distribution of choices. Who would you trust as a therapist for a loved one? We would end up with different choices. Who would you like to get more get to know more about. So it's always important to keep in mind that although someone might be a sociometric star or isolate based on a single prompt in a single group, that most people, perhaps everyone, has groups where they're a social star and has other groups where they're a social isolate. Has certain criteria where they're the social star and other criteria where they're a social isolate. And so I find that important to highlight and acknowledge, especially when doing sociometric tests with students and with clients. So the second core sociometric concept to highlight, which emerged from Moreno's research, sociometric research, his sociograms, is what he called Tele. T-E-L-E, Tele. Although Tele in the psychodrama community is primarily discussed in psychodrama and in role-playing and psychodramatic enactments, it actually was discovered through Moreno's sociometric research. Moreno realized that the number of reciprocal choices within a group, based on any prompt, the number of mutual choices, the number of times people chose each other, always was unexpectedly higher than what one might predict based on probability or statistics. That there always were more mutual choices than we would expect. And he defined this phenomenon as Tele. He says the trend toward mutuality of attraction and repulsion many times surpasses chance and possibility. The factor responsible for this effect is called Tele. It says that every wholesome human relationship depends on the presence of Tele, and that it's a type of kind of like a socio-gravitational force which brings humans together more often than we would without it. Some people describe Tele as a sort of two-way empathy, but it's more than just empathy. Another way that Moreno defines Tele is that it's the opposite of transference. So transference is a distortion of reality and of the relationship. It's a projection from the past into the here and now, whereas Tele is an accurate, a two-way accurate knowing and seeing and experiencing of another person. Jacob Moreno writes, by definition, transference tends to produce a dissociation of interpersonal relations. In contrast, Tele strengthens associations and promotes continuity, security, stability, reciprocity, and cohesiveness of groups. So, Tele is a mechanism by which group cohesion emerges. And the Morenos defined group cohesion as being a function of the number of reciprocal and mutual choices within that group. So one of the ways that we can think about group cohesion from a sociometric perspective, and as sociometrists working with groups, is to begin groups, especially groups in earlier phases of their development, to use exercises that promote one-on-one connection between group members, so that we can cultivate mutual choices, mutuality, and reciprocal relationships within that group, which will contribute to the overall sense of group cohesion. So, Tele is kind of an interesting thing in that many psychodramatists have difficulty providing a straightforward definition of what exactly Tele is, but every psychodramatist could point out to you, that right there, that thing that just happened, that was Tele. Tele was involved in that interaction. Perhaps the most common way that Tele manifests in psychodrama is through the protagonist's choice of roles. That when we're in the midst of a psychodrama enactment, and I ask the protagonist, hey, you said you wanted to offer forgiveness to your father in this psychodrama. Can you pick someone to play the role of your father? And they look around the group, and they don't know why, but they stop on Johnny, group member, and they say, Johnny, I want you to play the role of my dad. Will you play that role? They don't know why they picked Johnny. They just had a knowing, a sensation, an intuition, a conscious or unconscious hit that Johnny should be the person to play this role. And they pick Johnny. Johnny comes in and plays the role, and it becomes evident at the end of the psychodrama when Johnny starts to share about how they wish their son would forgive them for something they did. And there was a reciprocity in the roles and the relationships between Johnny and the protagonist. And we would say, that right there was Tele. You didn't know why, but you had an unconscious knowing that Johnny was the person to play that role. That was because of Tele. And on the other hand, the role player will often say, I just knew you were going to pick me. I didn't know why, but I just knew I was going to be chosen to play that role. And so it's often it's a two-way knowing in the interaction. Tele also is at play in doubling, when the director or group members offer doubling statements for a protagonist or a role. The attunement that comes with that doubling is based on Tele in some part. And it's also at play in role reversal, that when a client role reverses with another, or when an auxiliary role reverses taking on the role of another, that their ability to play that role is in part based on their telic connection to that person or to that role. So there's lots of different ways that it shows up throughout sociometry and psychodrama practice. Important to keep in mind that it actually originated in sociometry research, sociograms. So a number of Moreno's sociograms were also generated through his research in the Hudson Valley at a girls' reform school. It was at this girls' reform school where Moreno was actually hired as the director of social research for the New York State Department of Social Welfare. So here we see another connection between Moreno and the social work field. He was working for the Department of Social Welfare. And in his role, he did research using his sociograms on this group of over 500 community members in this girls' reform school. And he not only drew sociograms like the one I showed to you, but he generated these larger scale social networks. And so he experimented in his research at the girls' reform school, experimented with different methods, different avenues to try to uncover and better understand how these social networks worked. He often called them psychosocial networks. One of the interesting things that he did in order to map out the social networks within this large community is he would identify an individual in the community, take a look at the social atom surrounding that individual, and he would give that individual a rumor. He would tell them something completely untrue, tell them something crazy, a wild story about someone else in the community, or just a fabricated story, a rumor. And then they would assess how long it took for that rumor to spread to other community members. And he would measure the amount of time it took for the rumor to get to someone else in the community, to get to someone who the original person was completely unconnected to in their social atom. And by doing this, he would map out the complex social network within this larger community. And he started to think of social networks as these underlying emotional psychosocial currents within communities by which information spreads through the connections between individuals. He writes that the discovery that human society has an actual dynamic central structure underlying and determining all of its peripheral and formal groupings may one day be considered the cornerstone of all social sciences. So he really believed that these sociometric ideas were really important for understanding social sciences and understanding society. In 1943, he writes that sociometry, because of the unity of the human group, studies the human group as a totality. It studies every part with a view to the totality, and the totality with a view to every part. So again, you can see the connection between macro and micro in Moreno's sociometric system. Moreno was deeply committed to this vision that he had, or what he called societry, healing for society. He believed that working one-on-one with folks was simply not enough, and that we had to engage in larger groups. We had to promote healing within all of society, within communities. We had to work within groups to create change. So I really hope that you found this video helpful. If you wanted to read more about these connections, you can check out chapter 5 in the book. Again, you can download the entire book for free online, and we'll put a link to the book in the description here. If you found the book helpful, it would really go a long ways to consider writing an Amazon review, an honest review about the book. If you found this video helpful, it would also help me and help others see this content if you were to like the video or subscribe to the video. Comment on the video. Let me know what stood out to you about this presentation of sociometry. Let me know if you have any questions about sociometry. Let me know if there's other videos that I haven't made yet that would be really helpful for you that you'd like to see in the future. I'm really interested in hearing from you and hearing about how this content lands on you, how it's useful for you, or how it challenges you, how it fits with ways that you understand other theories, other ways of working. I'm really interested in connecting. So thanks again for watching this video, and check out some of the other videos on our channel here.